Howdy everybody, this is Omar, your audio amigo, back today with another episode of Thrifty Tunes. Today we're going to be looking at an IEM that I've had for a while, but have just been kind of using for a bit of fun now and then, finally on the review table. It's going to be the first in a series of 3 videos featuring bone conduction drivers in IEMs. This, I believe, is KBEar's first entry into the bone conduction space. This is the KBEar's KB02, priced at $40 US. It features a 10mm beryllium DD and a 10mm bone conduction driver. I feel like the budget space doesn't really have a ton of bone conduction representation, so will this be a good sort of budget starting point for the tech? Let's find out. Starting things off with the unboxing experience, this is a bigger box than is typical for KBEar IEMs, and inside you'll find the IEMs in whichever color you end up choosing, as well as a small box with the rest of the gear in it, that being the cable and 3 sets of ear tips. You get gray sort of narrow bore tips and these black tips that sort of have a different shape to them. You can see they're a little bit taller than the sort of gray ones, even though the bore sizes are similar. You also get these set of white tips whose bores are a little bit narrower and also have a bit of a different shape to them. So overall, you get 3 sets of ear tips, the cable, and that's it. I was kind of expecting a carry pouch like the one that you get on the KBEar Rosefinch, especially considering that this is a $40 US set. But let's just hope that they went ahead and put all the money they saved into the drivers and the build quality. Let's take a quick look at the cable. The cable on the KB02 is, I feel, one of the sort of standard cables in this price point. You get a black 4-wire twist that breaks up into 2-wire twists at the Y-split. The coating on the wires feels a little bit rubbery in the hands, but it doesn't snag too much when you're sort of just handling it in your fingers here. The 3.5mm jack here is not branded, but it does feature a little bit of knurling there to help you grip it out of some heavier amps. The Y-split is understated and matches sort of the rest of the hardware with that little bit of knurling there. The chin slider is one of these 2-hole designs, and y'all know how I don't like it when it doesn't sit flush against the Y-split, so yeah. The slider, I think, has just the right amount of resistance for sliding up and down. It'll stay in place if you're going to be walking with it. And the 2-pin connectors here, again, have the same sort of design on them to match the rest of the hardware. And the stereo indicators are very easily seen against the black there. The ear hooks are, not the greatest, but they're very comfortable and they're soft. They don't feel very rough in the ears. They look a little bit low rent, but it's comfortable. Overall, I would say that the cable here is appropriate for a $40 IEM, but I do wish it was maybe just a little bit nicer considering you don't get much else in the package. Let's take a look at how these are put together. You've got full resin shells here with metal nozzles sort of embedded into the lower shell here. The nozzles are metal and have a metal sort of filter recessed into the lip there. I can't tell whether there's damping material behind the screen or not. As far as ventilation goes, there's no vent where you would expect to find it sort of here on the nozzle ramp, but there is a vent here. Whether that's for the rear volume or the front volume, I don't know, but there is a separate vent here on the side over by the 2-pin connector. So that explains how I didn't get any driver flex or pressure buildup in these, which I think is always nice. They do feel very light in the hands, and the size is a bit larger than you would assume for that weight. They feel a little bit, feathery, if you will. But they're fairly solid. The resin quality seems nice. There's no obvious, seam lines in top and bottom, putting the faceplate on. The 2-pin connectors in there pretty solid. I would say these are about as well built as other resin IEMs at this price point. So let's get into the specifications for this. The KB02 is powered by a single 10mm dynamic driver with a beryllium diaphragm, and it also employs a 10mm elastic type bone conduction driver. I can't say for certain, but I think this elastic type driver is extremely similar to the spring type bone conduction driver for reasons that I'll elaborate on a little bit later. Even with the higher than normal 40 ohm impedance, I felt like the KB02 was relatively easy to drive with basically any phone or audio device. I didn't have any issues pushing it with my older Sony Xperia. The nozzles are sort of right on the threshold of what I would call big at 6.5 millimeters, but the weight, as I mentioned, is very, very light at under 6 grams per shell. Overall, if it wasn't for the bone conduction driver, this would be a super typical single DD budget set. One thing I will say is despite it having two drivers, the sound on this did not change when you add in a impedance adapter or when you're using a higher impedance source. So, there's no change to the sound quality there. Pretty typical. But now it's time for the cool wall. While sort of swirled colored resin faceplates like this are becoming more and more common these days, I feel like how nice they are varies wildly on the execution and sort of the lottery of the manufacturer that you're buying from. I went ahead and got the maple colorway of the KBO2. There's a purple and a blue one available. I kind of like the maple because at least the ones I got do have hints of purple and blue in the shells. They look really, really nice. The other colorways are pretty cool looking. They also have, variation, different colors in them and different swirls. Your mileage will vary with these, as is the case with a lot of these, sort of individually swirled IEMs. I'm going to put these in cool because I really think they look really awesome. And I like the fact that you have 3 different colorways to choose from. I think it adds an element of personalization to your purchasing choice. So based on previous results, the Council of Ladies actually likes swirled colors like this. So let's go ahead and look at what the new look Council of Ladies has to say about these. So first I asked them what colorway they personally would choose. We got 3 votes for blue and 1 vote each for the purple and the maple. So it looks like I may not have picked the best one in their eyes. But is the KBO2 pretty? It looks like it is. 4-1 in favor of pretty for the KBO2. I thought they liked the swirls, and I guess I was right. How about compliments? Looks like it's also going to be 4-1, with lady number 4 remaining the stalwart gatekeeper that she is. But now let's go ahead and get into their thoughts, and for the first time you get to see them all individually. Lady number 1 loves the colors, lady number 2 has a soft spot for poured resin, number 3 thinks they're all pretty but likes blue best, then brown, number 4 says she really only likes the blue, and finally number 5 says she hasn't seen swirls and colors like this before. So overall, I would say it's a very positive response from the ladies here. Very well done, KBEar. As far as comfort and wearability goes, I really had no issues with these. Even with those larger nozzles, I didn't experience any fatigue or issues wearing these for a very, very long time, even though the nozzles are on the larger side. Was able to keep these in for 4 to 5 hour gaming and writing sessions with 0 issues. My wife, on the other hand, failed these on her tiny ears test almost immediately. The rather largish shells on these, combined with the larger than normal nozzle, basically meant an immediate fail. They were constantly sliding out of her ears and she couldn't maintain a good seal. So if you've got smaller ears, maybe don't grab these. Alright, so before we get into the sound, I want to talk briefly about the bone conduction drivers in this set and how I personally experienced them. The bone conduction drivers in this set remind me a lot of the ones in the Canera Celeste Plutus Beast. And these come with essentially the same pros and cons that you would find if you saw some reviews or you've experienced the Plutus Beast. First and most obvious, there is a ringing sort of springy sound that happens when you even lightly touch them or you move them, or if they knock against each other in your pocket while you're handling them. Every adjustment that you make, sort of correcting their position in your ears, you will hear. And you will also get that sort of unnatural springy sensation when you're listening to spoken word or vocals or voice calls. For example, podcasts, sports radio, if you call your wife on the phone, or if you're editing an IEM review for your YouTube channel and your voice is in that specific frequency range that the bone conduction driver really likes buzzing around in. It turns into an unnatural, echoey reverberation effect that is, in my opinion, very distracting, especially if you're not listening to music, if it's just sort of vocals. Clearing your throat while wearing these causes that same springy echo. Crunchier foods, if you're going to eat while wearing these, also do that. So just keep all of that usability, awkwardness in mind as I talk about how they sound with music. Speaking of music, let's go ahead and kick things off as usual with the bass. The bass on the KBO2 here is boosted, and the bone conduction driver is very active down here. But I feel like it's in very specific places. Massive Attack's Angel, for example, has that low droning 65 Hz tone in the intro. That doesn't really trigger the bone conduction driver in a way that I can personally feel, but when the slightly lower 35-40 Hz electronic drum beats come in afterwards, you do feel a noticeable thump in your ear with these. Unfortunately, that thump also generates those echoey, springy overtones, and it feels like the note goes from sounding like a produced electronic, drum into something that sounds like, someone hitting a wooden sort of hollow sounding box. It's very distracting, and I don't know if the tactile sensation is worth the trade-off here. I understand a drum is a hollow box, but it just sounds unnatural. I got mixed results with EDM in general. The attack and decay, I think, of the note has a lot to do with how real or correct the note will sound. deadmau5's Ghosts and stuff, for example. Those low bass notes in the song are just fine. But the decay on those is much longer than the sort of short, sudden decay on Massive Attack's Angel. And I feel like that might have something to do with the way the tonality of the bone conduction driver works. When it comes to bass guitar and kick drums, I do feel like the bone conduction driver is doing work on Nirvana's In Bloom, specifically with that kick drum and bass guitar in the back of the track. The tonality isn't as adversely affected as it is with Massive Attack's Angel, and while it still comes off as slightly echoey in terms of tonality, I wouldn't say it's as distracting as the fake wooden box sound that you get in some EDM tracks. Overall, I would say the bass here is fine. It's not bass head levels of boost, and the tonality does take a hit with some tracks, but the extra rumbliness and buzziness that you feel in your ears is kind of nice. I will say I had better luck with hip-hop, rap, those type of tracks than EDM, so let's go ahead and call the bass a mixed bag. While the bass is boosted, it isn't so intense that I feel that it messes with the mid-range tonality, at least in my experience. Genesis's I Can't Dance is a good song for this set. The percussion in this song I feel triggers the bone conduction in a really pleasant way, and you can sort of hear the notes pulsating in your ears, which is a really interesting sensation. Phil Collins' voice sounds correct and doesn't cause any unnatural ringing in the bone conduction driver, which I think is good. The guitars and instruments sound mostly tonally correct, which is good, but I feel like there can be a little bit of tonal awkwardness from the bone conduction driver that sneaks in on some tracks. Female vocals are mostly unaffected and are actually a little bit forward. Angela's Adante ni koi woshite is a pretty good example here. Most of her vocals are unbothered from a tonal standpoint, but when Atsuko starts to dig deep for those lower notes, I feel like some of that echoey tonality from the bone conduction driver starts to set in. The rest of the song sounds great. The percussion, the claps in the background, they work really well with that bone conduction. They give the track some added dimension. But like the bass, I would call the mid-range here a mixed bag, depending on what you're listening to. Moving to the upper mids and treble, they are boosted to sort of balance out the bass boost. And since the bone conduction driver basically doesn't really do much up here in my experience, it also balances out a lot of that buzziness. There's quite a bit of emphasis on female vocal harmonics on the KBO2, but not so much that I feel like it would get fatiguing or overcooked. Vanity's Seventh Heaven from the Last Dragon soundtrack actually sounds really nice on this set. Her higher notes don't decay too quickly or slowly, and the tonality of the harmonics is nice, and it isn't piercing at all. If you're sensitive to some shoutiness, this set might be a bit much for you, but I think it does a pretty good job here. Instrument and percussion harmonics can get a little bit hot, and if you're treble sensitive, I definitely would try to stay away from this set. But for those of you who prefer a little bit of extra sparkle and shine to your music, you might find something to like here. The claps in Robert Palmer's Big Log sound very authoritative, very crisp, very sharp. They have a nice tonality to them without becoming overly fatiguing to me. I actually think the treble might be the best executed range on this set. It's a tiny bit hot, but in a really good way. It's more tonally correct than the mids and the bass, and I feel like it works with every song, unlike the bass, for example. Technical performance is a double-edged sword here. On the one hand, when the Brilliant Diaphragm DD is being helped by the bone conduction driver, the texture of those low notes really improves. You get a little bit more obvious detail out of it, and things just become easier to notice. When the bone conduction driver is working against the dynamic driver, however, it really reduces the overall resolution and resolving ability and overall accuracy of this set. I think it's safe to say that your mileage will vary by a lot here. The big orchestral bass drum at the beginning of the Droid Invasion from the Star Wars Episode 1 soundtrack has this wonderful texture to it, and even the lower horns have some great tonality, but on this set, the unnatural tonality starts to creep into some of the strings and the woodwinds. It makes them sound a little bit hollow, and it throws off the balance of the track overall. At the higher end of the frequency range, this set actually does extremely well with high-end detail. At the beginning of the overture / main title theme for Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, there's a soft electronic note as well as a piccolo that absolutely goes for it once the orchestra starts rising to its full splendor, if you will. And while you can hear the piccolo at the end when it's the only instrument playing, I feel like on decent headphones you can pick it out amongst the triangles and the strings and the woodwinds even when it's being a bit more subdued and everyone else is going. The KBO2 actually manages that pretty well. I feel like this is a surprisingly good replay of this song. Overall, in terms of technical performance, when it's at its full potential, it's somewhere between the EW200 and the Vivace. But when it's at its worst, it can be straight up distracting, and it just isn't good at all. When it comes to stereo separation, again, it's going to be a your mileage may vary situation. It's really going to depend on if the bone conduction driver is in its happy place and if it works for your particular ears. Mediterranean Sundance, which is my typical sort of test track for stereo separation, doesn't sound claustrophobic or closed in. It also really isn't anything special in terms of width, until that is Paco and Al start to tap on their guitar soundboards at around 54 seconds in. That tap sort of wakes up the bone conduction driver and it adds some extra width to the stereo separation that actually kind of works really well. The same sort of thing applies to Perceive 3D Soundstage. A well-mastered track will either be elevated by the bone conduction or made more intimate sounding by the bone conduction. Charlie Parker's I've Got You Under My Skin, the live version at Massey Hall. This is a case of the latter. It's an interesting song to test Soundstage with because it's a very early recording from the 50s, so any spatial information that you get isn't really due to the recording or mastering techniques. It's more down to room effect and the tuning of your headphones. All of that triggers sort of a psychoacoustic thing happening in your ears and in your brain, and the KBO2's bone conduction driver doesn't really do much of anything here. The track sounds like it was mastered. 3 musicians in a semi-treated room playing into a microphone. On the other hand, Buena Vista Social Club's Chan Chan, those deep guitars, the acoustic bass, the percussion that's all over the place, the bone conduction driver is in its element. It's doing its thing. It's adding that extra spatial information to your brain, and it works well. Soundstage overall is kind of a mixed bag, like a lot of other things on this set, and it's going to depend very heavily on your track choice. So, the KBO2 here is a V-shaped tuning that comes off to me as having sort of an experimental tech demo-y type feel to it. It's like they threw the bone conduction driver in and they said, all right, well, let's see what it does. It isn't neutral or natural sounding. It's not tonally, amazing. It isn't bright. It isn't mid-centric. It's very V-shaped. I'm going to compare it to some other V-shaped sets sort of above and below its current price range, as well as to some other sets that I've reviewed or have opinions on in terms of soundstage in beginning. So we'll talk about those. We'll start things off by talking about the very popular 7Hz 02 priced at $20 US. Again, my 02 is on loan, but we'll just pretend that this is a 02. These observations were made before I sent it out, so they're based on my detailed listening notes rather than the graphs. The 02 is a warmer, more relaxing, sort of chilled out version of the KBO2. The mid-bass is a little punchier, the lower mids are a little bit richer, but you lose out on some of that sparkly top-end detail. When the bone conduction driver is hurting the sound rather than helping the sound, the 02 honestly just feels like a better alternative. But when the KBO2 is firing on all cylinders, it can do some really fun stuff with, that buzzy sensation in your ears. I do think it's the much better looking set and it comes with a nicer cable, so take that into consideration, especially if the KBO2 goes on sale, which we'll discuss later. Next up at $35 is another sort of weird experimental IEM. It's the Zhulinniao JingHong Z3. Right off the bat, these two don't sound too much alike. The Z3 doesn't have the sub-bass extension and rumble that the KBO2 has. The KBO2 is actually brighter overall, but it's less shouty compared to the Z3. Reason I bring up the Z3 here is mostly because it has that second driver. See if I can show it here. That second driver there, that's going to be firing into your ear. Um, that is also capable of increasing the spatial sensation of the music that you're listening to. Both of these sets are flawed, but in different ways. The Z3, in my opinion, has flawed tuning, and a soundstage gimmick that works amazingly well and almost perfectly for me. The KBO2 has the opposite problem. The tuning here is actually quite nice, but the soundstage gimmick is only really partially functional for me, and it actually hurts the sound all the other time. The KBO2 is 100% the more fun experience here. The rumbly, buzzy sensation in your ears is just more satisfying compared to the sort of taller soundstage that the Z3 provides. This isn't me recommending one over the other. It's just some food for thought if you've been looking at sort of experimental soundstagey sets in this price range. I feel like these two are currently at the top of my list of weird things to try in the sort of $40, $50 price range. Next, we have the $40 Gatekeeper, the Simgot EW200 Ms. The KBO2 comes off to me as a slightly warmer version of the EW200. The KBO2 has more sub-bass rumble and less airiness and energy and sort of detail in the treble overall. If you found the EW200 fatiguing, the KBO2 might be an option for you if you want to retain a little bit of that sparkle and shine up in the top end. To me, it was more toned down versus the EW200, but you do lose some of the resolution that the EW200 has. It's the more revealing, accurate of the two. Again, when you do have a track that the bone conduction driver is working here for, it's definitely the more fun of the two, but the EW200's contrasty sound is more reliably engaging, I will say, than the KBO2 is. Next up, we've got what I think is one of the better $50 IEMs currently available. It's the Inawaken Dawn Ms. These two sets are actually super similar. They both have swirly face plates. They both have V-shaped sound signatures. The biggest difference here is what drivers they employ. The Dawn comes off to me, again, more detailed, more resolving, more accurate tonally overall than the KBO2. This has better bass texture, and the overall sound is more tonally correct to my ears than the KBO2 is. Now, most of that can be attributed to the fact that the bone conduction driver in the KBO2 is sometimes hindering the track that's playing. Again, I'm going to say, like I've said with everything else, if you have a track that works well on the KBO2, this is a more fun listen than this. But if you have the KBO2 and you've been listening to it and you're kind of like, I like it, and I just wish the bone conduction driver wasn't sort of ruining the tonality here. I don't like the springy feeling of it. Check out the Dawn Ms. It's a very similar tuning, just without the bone conduction driver and with a better overall tonality and sound, in my opinion. Finally, I have one last set to bring out, and it's a set that I feel is actually very, very close to the KBO2. It's the previously mentioned Canera Celeste Plutus Beast, priced at an MSRP of $90 US. The KBO2 honestly came off to me as just a Plutus Beast, but slightly more V-shaped and slightly less vocal forward. Now, I haven't reviewed the Plutus Beast, but I have listened to it a good bit, and the unique tonality, let's call it, of the Plutus Beast is honestly the closest thing I've heard ever to the KBO2. Honestly, I would go ahead and call the KBO2 just a cheaper, slightly differently tuned Plutus Beast. If you have a Plutus Beast and it's broken, or you lost it, or you sold it, and you kind of miss that buzzy, bone conduction-y sound that it has, regardless of the sort of tonal downsides that it has, look into the KBO2, especially on sale. It might surprise you. This at $40 makes this at $90 look not the best, let's just say. This cable is nicer. The shells are, also pretty, and the accessories package is much, much nicer. But in terms of overall sound accuracy and levels of fun because of that bone conduction driver, this is absurdly close to this. So let's go ahead and sum everything up. In terms of sets with experimental things to increase the soundstage and give you more spatial information, I think that the Z3 here from Zhulinniao has less tonal drawbacks than the KBO2. That said, the tuning is better on the KBO2, at least I prefer it. The 02 here is a warmer, less bright alternative at a lower price, and the EW200 is a brighter, more resolving alternative at the same price point. You also get a slightly better accessories package. Where the KBO2 beats absolutely everything on this table, with the exception of the Plutus Beast, is the fun department. If you find a song that makes this bone conduction driver absolutely sing, it'll absolutely rock your ears, and that extra texture and buzziness is going to be a whole lot of fun. If you find a song that it doesn't like, however, it can be, let's just say, tonally awkward. The sound quality becomes a bit compromised when you hear that springy, unnatural tonality. It's an awful lot like the Plutus Beast, which, in my opinion, is a more vocal-forward, more expensive version of this with better accessories. But enough comparisons. Let's scoot everybody else out of here and see where the KBO2 is going to wind up on the Audio Amigo Arbitrary rating scale. Wait for the helicopter. Okay, looks like it's gone. So, the KBO2 here feels a bit like an experiment to me. Unlike the CVJ Konoka before it, which I think was the cheapest way to get sort of a bone conduction-ish driver in a budget set, this actually does do something for my ears to improve the listening experience. Not to the extent where it makes basically everything better, but it does have a positive effect on a decent number of songs. I'm going to say it again, but the KBO2 basically reminds me of a cheaper, slightly better executed version of the Plutus Beast. Again, consider this cost $90 when it first came out, and this is $40. This seems like a pretty good value by comparison. As I said in the comparison section, this and the Z3 here are sort of mirror images of each other. KBO2 has great tuning and a not always fantastic soundstaging gimmick, and the Z3 has that kind of warmish, wonky, shouty tuning, but with a soundstage gimmick that basically works for every track, at least for my ears. Both sets are priced similarly, and while the Z3 comes with a better accessories package, the tuning on the KBO2 I feel will work better for more people's ears. That being said, it's going to go right next to the Z3 in the but I like this class. When the bone conduction driver on this set hits, it hits really well. It can be so much fun on songs that just really like this set. But again, on the songs where it doesn't, it just lessens the whole experience, and it doesn't come off as a very pleasant listening experience. So, do I recommend the KBEar KB02? Well, it's going to depend on what you're looking for in an IEM, and honestly, how much you can get it for. MSRP on this is $40, but I've seen it on sale for under $30 almost constantly at most stores. I got mine for $25 on sale, and I think that for that price, it can be a pretty decent, fun little budget set for occasional casual listening sessions. This isn't for you if you're a detail freak. This isn't for you if you're looking for a content consumption headphone. The way the bone conduction driver reacts to voices can be very distracting. So if you're looking for something for, movies, voice calls, podcasts, this is not it. This also isn't for you if you're a treble head or a bass head. It's not super, bright and sparkly at the top end, and the bass tonality is compromised. It's not for people who are looking for something neutral to listen to, because it definitely isn't. Who this is for is if you're someone who's looking to try out bone conduction, but you're kind of on a shoestring budget. If you want to experiment with the bone conduction and see how the driver would work for your specific music, at least this type of driver, give it a shot. I feel like this is, again, for collectors who want to try something a little bit different and see how it fits their library. This is also for you if you've tried the Plutus Beast and liked the tonality and the sort of rumbliness of it, but you don't want to have to shell out the MSRP for this set. Like a lot of budget sets sort of at and around this price point, I think that the KBO2 becomes a better buy the cheaper you can get it. So if you're interested in this, I would say keep an eye out for discounts. It tends to go on sale fairly regularly, as I mentioned. Honestly, overall, I like the KBO2. It represents just a bit of mindless fun for me. Just put these in, turn your brain off, put on some bass-heavy tracks, and just see how the experience is. Just have fun with it. Don't take it too seriously. But that's going to do it for this one. It wraps up the first of my little 3-video bone conduction IEM mini-series. We've seen what's possible here at the budget end of the market. Next up is a much, much more expensive IEM, so go ahead and look forward to that. But for now, that's it. I really hope you all enjoyed the review. Thank you all so much for watching. This has been Omar with Audio Amigo Reviews, and I will catch you all next time.